And we are live. Check out my Christmas t-shirt. Wham. So I'll confess right now, it's actually my wife's t-shirt. But when I said to her, well, I've got Whisky Me tasting tonight and I need to wear something festive, I was going to go with a Christmas jumper. And it was her that offered up the Wham t-shirt. So if you've been playing Whamageddon, which is the Christmas game where you lose the first time you hear Last Christmas, then if you haven't heard Last Christmas already, you can now consider yourself lost because you've seen a Wham t-shirt instead. Anyway, this is not, in fact, a Wham tasting or Wham listening. It is Whisky Me live, and we are here to taste this month's Scotch single malt whiskey, which is, of course, Linkwood 12. And backed by popular demand. And when I say popular, I mean it was pretty damn hard to actually pin him down on this tasting tonight, but we managed it somehow. He has not one whiskey tasting to do tonight, but three, and we are the filling in that sandwich. So I'm going to introduce him now, the one, the only, Colin Dunn.
Oh,
Hey, Colin.
fantastic. That's a great intro. That's a great intro. Hello, everyone, particularly to the newbies. For the first timers, if there's some first timers out there, this is a great way to appreciate whiskey. You're going to be talking to, in the future, all of these sessions, people who are involved in the industry. From my side, I'm called an ambassador, actually, I'm called quite a few different things, but we'll stick with ambassador. And basically, I love whiskey and I love imparting what knowledge I get from the distillery, from the staff, and just letting people know across the UK, really, at the moment, what they're doing, what they're creating, what they're experimenting with. And with what we have this evening, Tristan's picked out one of our almost unsung distilleries, really. And I'm rabbiting on already, Tristan, without you even having to open your mouth. And I just wanted to say to you,
whiskey in it. Let you talk.
Yeah, you have a dram, right? And just so you're aware, viewers, the company that I spend most of my time with, we've got 28 different distilleries. Just think about that, 28. Now that doesn't mean that, although that's around about a third of what's out there or a quarter. What do we do with those 28 distilleries? Because if I stopped people in the street and said, how many Diageo distilleries could you name? If you got more than 10, I'd be impressed. And the reason is we've got a lot of distilleries who are making whiskey that will go into blends, because blends is around about 90% of the industry. Now, here's the rub. Here's the thing. Diageo are a blending company who also create single malts. And with the growth of single malts in the last 10 years, all of a sudden, every bar, every back bar across the world, across the universe, as the Beatles would say, they've all got these massive selections of single malts now. So in Diageo's world, with those 28 single malts, I just want to put this to you so that you can understand the method. I won't say the madness, but the method in what they have to do. They have to work out in years to come how much they will need to produce to satisfy not just their own blenders, but also other companies, because we share with other companies. We share new make spirit straight off the still, put into barrels, watered down to 63.5, which is the industry level, so that when we exchange, no money is passed. It's a straight exchange of new make spirit at 63.5. So when we looked at the beginning of each year on how much whiskey will we need from each distillery to go into each of these blends, you've then, once you've got that figure approximately, you've then got to say, right, well, what kind of spirit do we need to produce at that distillery? Because every distillery, as Tristan knows, can change their makeup if they want to. For example, there's a distillery on Islay called Culila, which makes a real big bacon fat, peaty bacon style whiskey, but also they produce a whiskey with no peat that goes into black label, although there's still a lick in the actual makeup. So to give you an idea of this crazy scenario, at Diageo, we have a list of 28 distilleries. And just to give you an example, that means this is almost like, dare I say the word, a spreadsheet on what we need from those distilleries to go into the various blends around the world. As an example, Mortlach, we require the new make to be meaty. Glenkinchie, we require it to be sulphury. Dalhuan, Glenelgin, I'm not going to go through the whole lot, but it's really interesting. And when we get to Linkwood, what we require off Linkwood is perfumed notes. That means from Linkwood, the request will be, we need your whiskey to go into some of our blends around the world. And the top note, the texture and the top note that we require from you will be an oiliness, and the top note is accentuating the aromatic complexities of the whiskey. So when you actually get to nose Linkwood, if you've not already, because I know I would if I was at home, just get your olfactory epithelium, your nose working, so that you can understand that when people start talking about how do they evaluate whiskey, it's really simple. There's a beginning and a middle and an end. There's a nose, a mouthfeel, and a finish. And then you can ascertain what you can do with this particular style. Does it work in a cocktail? Very few people have tried with Linkwood, although I have tried in the past a hot toddy where Linkwood was used, and with all the other ingredients, the honey, etc., and the tea, it worked. So to summarize,
it worked really well in a highball, Colin. Just because that perfume thing, and if you think about like mizuwaris, like Japanese highballs with the still water, and that when you stir them down, you lengthen them out, and it accentuates that perfumed quality that you find in whiskies. I think Linkwood's prime for highball treatment, and hot toddy probably more apt for this time of year.
Yeah, and to give you an understanding, Linkwood, until, in fact, in a way, just for a second, I feel a little bit sorry for them, because being a big whiskey fan, when you look at the rise of single malts in our company, things changed in 1989 with what was called the classic malts, where there were 6 different whiskies from 6 different regions. And at that time, it was believed that the region produced a certain style, terroir, if you will, in modern times. But what a lot of people don't realize or know is that before the classic malts, which came out in 1989, there was the Ascot collection, which was 4 single malts.
Oh, I don't know about this.
Yes,
this is new to me.
The Ascot collection, 4 single malts, and this was the precursor to the classic malts. And it only lasted for about a year. And guess what? The Speyside choice was Linkwood. But by the time we got to 1989, a decision was made. And let's be fair about it, in Speyside, Diageo have got 12, 13 different whiskeys to choose from. Cragganmore became the choice. So Linkwood then went back to being a blended malt, or producing whiskey to go into blends. So it had its 1 year, and I don't even have a bottle of that, right? But I need to get hold of that at some point, because
was that a 12-year-old?
Yes, it was. With a unique label, etc. So Linkwood, unfortunately, this wonderful aromatic perfume style went back to doing what it does best to a degree, and it was forgotten until, with the sudden emergence of whiskey being drunk as a single malt, it was deemed that all of those distilleries in Diageo, all those ones that are on that list, Diageo said, we want to give the public, let alone the staff, an opportunity to be able to buy whiskey from all of our distilleries. So a small amount was set aside of single malts to be released to the general public. And the key thing about it was something that I was such a big fan of. These whiskies were only sold to independent whiskey specialists, of which around the country there were about 40, 45. You know, those shops that hand sell everything that they have on their shelves. You go to them for advice on what to have from a taste perspective. So a range came out that was called the Flora and Fauna range, because on the front of every label there's something that says, look, the swans in this case, or the otters, or the eagles, you know, something flora and fauna that says this is what happens around the distillery.
There's quite an innovative thing, I think, because we talk a lot about terroir these days, but when that flora and fauna range were released, the whole idea around place and, you know, what inhabits that place and what represents the distillery. I mean, it wasn't new. You know, people were talking a lot about water sources and location, everything then, but to be very sort of distillery specific was quite an innovative move, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a debatable thing now. You know, I mean, there's that great story about for those of you at home who have heard of Lefroy and Lagavulin. If you go back to the early 20th century, a gentleman called Peter Mackey tried to make a Lefroy style whiskey 200 yards away at Lagavulin distillery. And he used the same distillation times, the same wood, the same water source. And guess what? The whiskey tasted completely different from 200 yards up the road. So whether it's down to the wild yeasts near the mash tun, it's the debate is still going on to this day on what the actual word terroir related to whiskey as opposed to wine, where it's been developed.
Ironically, though, the whiskey that he made there ended up becoming one of the most valuable whiskies in the world, right? That's Malt Mill you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I just finished my last bottle of it. I wish.
I don't think there are any known bottles of Malt Mill, are there? Or if there are, there's very few.
Yeah, I mean, it was used in a blend called Ainsley's, and there may be, for those of you at home, old whiskies now are becoming really collectible. You know, it's almost like this whole whiskey explosion that's happened, and accentuated by Whisky Me and what we're doing this evening. Often people want to go, what was it like 20 years ago? What was it like 30 years ago? Or even longer. So older whiskies now, like that Ascot collection, Linkwood, for example, people like to be able to compare and contrast. And whereas, say, with Linkwood, we have the 12-year-old right here, we also release some Linkwoods at a slightly older age. We released a 37-year-old a while back. That's just a number, by the way. It still comes down to the taste. And there's been some incredible wood finishes that have been released with Linkwood. So all of a sudden now, you've entered, for anyone just joining up to Whisky Me, it's like Howard Carter opening the tomb of Tutankhamun. You've opened up a veritable cornucopia of flavors that Tristan is bringing to your door, nay, your letterbox, every month
through the door. But this is why I think the Flora and Fauna range is so tailor-made for what we do at Whisky Me, because they're not bottles that you see every day, but they're really interesting, and there's a massive story behind all of them. Although all the labels sort of look the same, you know, it's all the same bottle, all the same sort of design and everything. Every distillery tells its own story. And that's, you know, there's a historical story, there's a story about the people, and then there's the story about flavor. And so it really is like just perfect for what we're doing, because it's opening up doors. And of course, like you say, Linkwood, besides the Flora and Fauna 12-year-old and the very occasional special release, which is usually very expensive, you're only going to get it in independent bottlings. And so, and independent bottlings for someone who's, you know, relatively new to whiskey can be a total minefield and quite confusing, because you understand there's a distillery and you understand their expressions, the 12-year-old, 15-year-old or whatever, non-age statement release it is. But then you're like, oh, right, that's got someone else's name on it and the name of the distillery. And then it's got, whatever year it's produced and whatever year it's bottled. And what the hell does that mean? Is it any good? And I think that by exploring these whiskies in their arguably sort of purest form, you could say that the flora and fauna is the sort of purest expression of these distilleries, I suppose, or one of the purest expressions. It gives you at least a sort of grounding in what to expect from that whiskey. And then you can kind of go wherever you want from there.
Yeah. And I think, if I had to simplify it, as I often do with people drinking whiskey, I try to work out that for me, my first question is the whiskey grain dominant, or is it wood dominant, or are they both coming together to create a particular style? So in this case, the wood, they're using American oak barrels, which is not unusual. It's around about 90% of the industry. And they're using barrels that have come from Kentucky, and they're using them refill, and they're also using them first fill. So they're using two different styles where they're getting the impact, some of the vanillins and coconut notes from the wood, which is drawn out and mixes with that new make spirit. And with the refill casks, there's less of the oak that's dominant. It's allowing that, and they use this often with Linkwood, that clean, fresh style, which has had a long fermentation, up to 100, 110 hours to bring out more of the aromatic notes. Some whiskies appeal through smoke. Some whiskies appeal through wood. Some whiskies, and I'm in this category at the moment, particularly this evening, some whiskies cater for the grain, and they allow the grain to sing to the individual and decide, how you would like to drink it. And I think the key thing that I would say to viewers at home is, if you can, and I'm sure you will, learn to appreciate delicacy. There's a big, particularly in the wintertime, it's easy to go for something that's powerful and pungent, that's big, that's showing lots of complexity. But for me, the hidden gems are the ones that are more delicate and fragrant and can react with your memory bank and bring back certain aromas that you've had in the past. Nosing whiskey is almost as much fun as tasting it. Some of the best ones I go back to 10, 15, 20 minutes, which is incredibly geeky. But to get the true enjoyment of a whiskey, that sort of playfulness that comes with the aroma, obviously in the right glass as well, then you can decide, because each of you at home have got different taste buds. We're all at different stages. I'm sort of entering my 7th decade now, and I'm going in for delicacy. I've had the big, powerful sherry matured bombs. I've had the big peaty styles, and they're great, and I enjoy them, but it shows the diversity. But when I come back to delicacy, of which is expressing itself here, I think of the first time that I got it, and it's with a whiskey that I'm not even sure whether Tristan's had it, but I was introduced to a flora and fauna whiskey called Rosebank. Now, Rosebank, thankfully, as like a phoenix from the ashes, is now reopening with new owners, which is brilliant. But it got closed down, sadly, back in the 80s. But when I first smelt Rosebank, it was like I just discovered a brand new perfume or air freshener. I literally got rid of Yoji Yamamoto, and I put Rosebank into my little spray can, and I would have Rosebank, because this is when it was like £40.
Yeah.
More than £40. And in my flat, people would say, "What air freshener are you using?" And I used to go, Rosebank. And Rosebank would have been the classic malt's choice, except it was so small, it didn't get developed. So,
well, I mean, the clue's in the name, right? If ever there was an aptly named distillery, it's Rosebank, right? You know, perfumed and floral and all those things. It smells like a bank of roses.
Yeah.
As does this. I was just, I've been tasting it as you've been talking, and some interesting stuff, as always, Colin. But I added some water to it because I always find with perfumed whiskies like this and oily whiskies, sometimes the aromatic character of it is almost sort of like tensed up, you know, at this high strength. Add a splash of water to it, and it's unbelievable. And I think if I was going to compare this to a wine, it would be a Riesling, you know, because you've got that kind of oily, paraffin-y thing, but you've also got such beautiful sort of perfumed and a little bit of fruit there as well.
You know, and this is a great topic. A while back, I did a tasting, and it could have been Linkwood, but it wasn't. It was a whiskey called Royal Lochnagar, which I'm a huge fan of, and they do a whiskey that's been finished in Muscat, a sweet grape that you find in places like Alsace. And there was a woman at this particular tasting. It was a whiskey dinner, and she said, "Look, I don't really like whiskey. Have you got some wine that I could have instead?" And I thought, okay, right. And she forewarned me. This was 30 minutes before the dinner. So I took this Royal Lochnagar, just talking about it briefly here, because Linkwood falls into that category. And I put it straight into the freezer. And then I served it up 35 minutes later in a wine glass. But by then I'd watered it down, like Tristan has just done. I cut it in half. I took it down to like fortified wine territory, like 18 to 20 degrees alcohol, and put it into a Riedel wine glass or a nice wine glass, and served it up with the smoked salmon starter. And I said, "Here you go, madam." And she tasted it. She goes, "That's wonderful." She goes, Is this a?" She goes, "I love wine." She goes, "This reminds me of a Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley." I said, "Well, yeah, it's you're quite close. It's a little bit sort of east of there, of 500 miles, but this is actually a whiskey." And I finished by saying, "Listen, Jesus Christ could turn water into wine. I turn wine into whiskey, or should I say, whiskey into wine, the other way around." So, what I'm saying to you at home, Linkwood can do that. You know, Tristan's just touched on that. You can actually
chill it, like you say. Get it cold, put it in the right glass. You can fool people for sure, like, obviously, as you've done it. But it is surprising, the similarities. You won't, I guess, get the sort of acidity, that crispness that you get in a glass of wine. But when it's cold enough, it will feel like a soft, juicy. I might go and do that with the rest of what I've got here, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's very grassy. I mean, you know, Sauvignon Blanc would be another kind of suggestion. Not a New Zealand Sauvignon, a Loire Sauvignon.
French,
more delicate, you know. But and bear in mind, you know, the Japanese for decades have been drinking highballs with their dinners. You know, if you go, there's some restaurants I know in London where you can get a 9-course Japanese meal and you'll get 9 highballs. You'll get 9 whiskey and ice, or whiskey and water, or whiskey and soda, depending on what the mix is. And they've become incredibly popular. Highballs is, I'm seeing it more and more and more on menus now. Black Rock do a highball menu, you know, without mentioning any names. This is a great way of realizing that the liquid that you've got, irrespective of which distillery, if it's able to metamorphosize into a different style, maybe take away the burn, but accentuate the nose, you know, like having a watering can and pouring it onto a flare that's closed. The flare opens up and you get this wonderful array of that perfumed aroma. Somebody said to me, "This reminds me of rose water." And I get it. You know, we've all got our different influences coming forward, but in the Diageo stable, in that list that I showed you, this is one of just 2 that we call perfumed. We're looking at oily, spicy, peaty, waxy, fruity, grassy. Do you
Which
see
is
what
the
I
other
mean?
perfume?
Strangely enough, we were looking at Oban.
Oh,
I know.
interesting.
It is. It is interesting.
I mean, it is, but it is slightly perfumed. Obviously, there's a little bit of that sort of, there's a bit of smoke in there, isn't there, with Oban?
Yeah,
At
and
least,
the other thing, Tristan, to mention is, and we're talking, viewers, about, you know, what we need for that distillery to produce. It won't necessarily be that Oban we mentioned here. It won't necessarily be a 12-year-old, right? Or 14-year-old, should I say?
Yeah.
It could well be a 5 or 6 years of age. So I think it's great that you're able in the course of the next, you know, year, 2, 3, whatever. You're lucky. I'm pleased that you're able to get on this journey that Tristan has put together, where he's going to be taking you through this wonderful journey of each distillery that's got its own character, that's not saying it's better, but it's saying this is what we're doing. I was interested last night. I was listening to the interview you did with Starwood.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And what he was talking about toasting and charring, you know, the industry is always experimenting. We've just released some casks that we've finished in cognac casks. We've taken Cardew with that Gaelic name of Black Rock. We've taken Cardew and we've put it into a red wine cask. And ultimately, you can bet your bottom dollar that we've not just tried with red wine. We've probably done about, Jim Beveridge, bless his heart, he's probably done about 10 or 20 different experiments.
Yeah.
And then choosing the one that he wants to release to the public, you know. So
it is amazing, and it's amazing to go on the journey with us, but also with the distillery, to see what it is that they're trying, what it is that they think best represents them with these expressions, whether it's Starwood or Linkwood or Talisker or whatever. I think it's fascinating. Two things, because I know you've got to go. One is that we had one question, which was how long has Colin worked for Diageo? I can answer that question because I used to work for Diageo, and Colin and I started the same week. And I think it was about 13, 14 years ago.
2008.
Yeah, 13 years ago. Yeah. So there you go. There's that question. He obviously lasted out a bit longer than me. I left after a couple of years to do other things. And then the final thing to mention is next month we have a ludicrously special whiskey, because we have bought 3 casks from a distillery that I'm not going to tell you which one it is yet. I'll tell you, Colin, afterwards. Don't worry. But it's super secret. 100 casks. And we're going to be sending that out to you next month. And we've got some left over that we're going to be putting in bottles as well. So we're really excited. We've done it once or twice before, but this is the biggest cask purchase we've done in one hit. Wow. So it's a super close Christmas present. Anyway, I mentioned at the start, we are the filling in Colin's sandwich, evening sandwich. He is doing 3 tastings tonight, virtually. I assume they're virtual. Otherwise, you better get in a taxi. And we've only got him for half an hour, and our half an hour is up. So thanks, Colin. Really appreciate you taking time to come and do this with us. It's always amazing and insightful and inspiring to hear.
Well, just summarize for all of you viewers, seriously, I'm so glad that you've taken the first step on this journey of whiskey appreciation. I watch every episode because you can always learn. And it's always about opinions. And, you know, my hashtag on, what is it, Instagram? Whiskey is a conversation. And that's exactly what Tristan is doing every month. And he's giving you an opportunity to go effectively around the world in taste and flavors. So a Merry Christmas to all of you. I'm so pleased to be able to get my shirt on this evening and look resplendent, before I do my Vogue shoot next week. But Tristan, thank you for inviting me on. A real pleasure. And to all of you out there, safe Christmas and New Year, and hopefully see you in 2022.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.